A fish fillet has no face. That sounds like a strange thing to say out loud, but it is the single most important fact in this entire video, and everything else follows from it. Think about every other thing we have examined in this series. A chicken breast is unmistakably a chicken breast. A tomato is a tomato. A loaf is bread. In every case, the deception was about something around the food, where it came from, how old it was, who actually made it. The food itself was never in question. Fish is different, and it is different for a reason that is almost embarrassingly simple. Take any white fish. Remove the head, the tail, the fins, the skin, and the bones. Cut what is left into a rectangle. Now put that rectangle next to a rectangle cut from a completely different species, caught in a different ocean, worth a fraction of the price. You cannot tell them apart. Nobody can. Not a chef, not a fishmonger, not a food scientist, not by looking. There is one way to know for certain what species a boneless white fillet actually is, and that way is to sequence its DNA. So people did. For 20 years, researchers around the world have been walking into shops, restaurants, canteens, and takeaways, buying fish, taking it back to a laboratory, and reading its genome. And then comparing what the genome said against what the label said. And the technique they use is worth understanding, because it is the reason this whole field of research exists at all. It is called DNA barcoding, and the idea behind it is elegant. Somewhere in the genome of almost every animal, there are short stretches of sequence that vary reliably between species, but hardly at all within a species. For fish, the standard workhorse is a section of a gene in the mitochondria, the part of the cell that handles energy, that is short enough to read cheaply and variable enough to tell a cod from a haddock without ambiguity. So you take a few milligrams of flesh, you extract the DNA. You amplify that one short region, read the sequence of letters, and compare it against a reference library of sequences from specimens that were properly identified by taxonomists. The result is not an opinion. It is not a probability. It is a name. And critically, it works on cooked fish, on frozen fish, on minced fish, on fish in batter, and fish in a sauce. It works on a fillet with no head, no skin, and no bones, because the identifying information was never in the head or the skin. It was in every cell all along, which is the quiet turning point in this entire story. For most of the history of the fish trade, the only person who could reliably identify a species was somebody with decades of experience looking at whole animals. Then, quite suddenly, a laboratory technician with a 200-pound reagent kit could do it better, on a sample the size of a fingernail, from a portion that had already been cooked and eaten around. The trade did not become more dishonest, it became measurable. Those are very different things, and confusing them is how a lot of scare stories get written. In February 2026, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization pulled that body of work together into a single report. The headline finding was this: up to 20% of fishery and aquaculture products globally are mislabeled, 1 in 5. And one of the report's authors, Esther Garrido-Gamaro, put the significance of that in a single sentence. Mislabelling and fraud are more prevalent in the aquatic sector than in many other food sectors. Not as prevalent as, more prevalent. Fish is, by the measurements we have, the most systematically misdescribed food category on Earth. Now, 3 things before we go any further, because this video has a genuine twist in it, and I do not want you to reach it by accident. The first is a promise. There is a code printed on the fish you buy in a British supermarket, right now, today. It is legally required to be there. It looks like bureaucratic noise, and almost nobody has ever read it, and it tells you the specific region of the specific ocean the fish came out of. I'm going to teach you to read it, and once you can, the fish counter becomes a completely different place. The second is a warning. There is one product in the British freezer aisle where a substantial proportion of what is inside the breadcrumbs can legally be a different species entirely, and I mean a documented, measured proportion, not a suspicion. I will name it and give you the number. And the third is the twist, which I am going to tell you now rather than save, because it is the honest thing to do and because I think it will make you watch more closely rather than less. The British supermarket is one of the safest places in Europe to buy fish. I did not expect that. I expected this video to be a demolition. It is not. What the evidence actually shows is that this country got something right, and then it shows you precisely where the problem moved to instead. That second part is the video. So let's start with why fish is uniquely vulnerable. It is not really about dishonesty. It is about the length and opacity of the chain. A cow is reared in one place, killed in one building, and processed largely within one national system. A fish is caught by a vessel that may be at sea for weeks, that may transfer its catch to another vessel entirely while still on the water, that lands into a port which may not be in the country whose flag it flies. From there, the fish can be shipped frozen halfway around the world to be filleted and portioned in a country with lower labor costs, then shipped again to be packed, then again to be sold. By the time a fillet arrives in front of you, it may have crossed 4 jurisdictions and passed through 6 companies, and at every single one of those transfers there is a document that says what it is. Not a test, a document. The species travels as a claim, written down by someone, and each subsequent handler inherits that claim and passes it on. Which means a single wrong entry, whether a genuine error or a deliberate one, propagates all the way to your plate, and every party downstream of it is technically telling the truth as they understand it. Then add the economics. The price gap between species that look identical once filleted can be enormous. A cheap farmed whitefish and a premium wild-caught one are visually indistinguishable and can differ several-fold in price. That gap is the entire motive, and it exists at every step. The FAO report catalogues where this leads, and some of it is remarkable. Farmed Atlantic salmon sold as wild-caught Pacific salmon. Greek sea bass sold as Italian. Frozen then thawed whitefish sold as fresh. Imitation crab in Los Angeles, where over 60% of samples were found to contain shark. Products sold as shrimp that were constructed from starch-based compounds. And underpinning all of it, a testing rate that barely registers. In the United States, less than 1% of imports are tested. One of the report's contributors, Francesca Ciparoni, framed the problem as a question, and I think it is the right question. If it is that easy to mislabel and sell tilapia as red snapper, how can consumers be certain? The honest answer is that they cannot. Not by themselves, not at the point of sale, not without a laboratory. Which is exactly why what happens in the regulation matters more here than in any other food category we have looked at. And I want to deal with something now, before the skeptics in the comments get there first. Is this actually harmful, or is it just annoying? Because the obvious reading is that this is a money problem. You paid for the expensive fish and got the cheap one, which is theft, but not a danger. That reading is incomplete in 3 specific ways. The first is allergy. Fish and shellfish are among the most significant allergens there are, and reactions to them can be severe. Someone who has learned carefully and over years which species they can safely eat is relying entirely on the label being accurate. Substitution turns a managed condition into a lottery. The second is that some substitute species carry their own problems. There is a well-documented pattern of oilfish and escala being sold as other species. Fish whose flesh contains indigestible wax esters that can cause unpleasant gastrointestinal effects, and which some countries restrict or ban from sale for that reason. And the FAO's finding that over 60% of imitation crab samples in one American city contained shark is not just a species issue. Shark is a long-lived predator that accumulates mercury, and a shopper choosing a mild processed seafood stick has made no decision whatsoever about eating it. The third is that substitution is one of the main ways illegally or unsustainably caught fish enters a legitimate market. If a protected or over-quota species can be landed, filleted, and relabeled as something abundant, then every conservation limit downstream of that point is a piece of paper describing a fish that nobody checked. So, not merely a pricing issue, a food safety issue, a public health issue, and an environmental enforcement issue, all riding on the same wrong word. Now, 30 seconds, and then I show you why Britain is different. The Food Ledger UK is a new channel. Today's video is built on peer-reviewed genetics papers, a United Nations agency report, government labelling guidance, a marine conservation briefing, and a 2024 study of British seafood supply chains from 2 university research TMs, all public, all free, all read by essentially nobody outside the industry. I am trying to get to 5,000 subscribers, not 100,000, 5,000. That is where this becomes sustainable enough to keep doing properly. If you have learned something in the last 6 minutes, press subscribe. It costs nothing, and it is the difference between this continuing and this quietly stopping. 5,000. Now the twist. In 2015, a team led by Professor Stefano Mariani, then at the University of Salford, published what was at the time the largest genetic study of seafood labeling accuracy ever conducted in Europe. They collected 1,563 samples across 19 European cities in 6 countries over 2013 and 2014, and DNA tested everyone. Everybody expected a bloodbath. Earlier studies had produced alarming numbers. The overall European mislabelling rate they found was 4.9%. And the United Kingdom, with samples taken in Cardiff, Glasgow, Plymouth and Manchester, came in at 3.3%, below the European average. Cod was mislabeled in 3.5% of samples. Haddock, 3%. The worst offender was anchovy at 15.5%, followed by hake at 11% and tuna at just under 7%. Those are not good numbers in an absolute sense. 1 in 30 is still 1 in 30, and for anchovy it is 1 in 6. But set against the 20% global figure and against the earlier European studies that ran far higher, they represent something genuinely unusual in this series: measurable improvement. And the researchers were explicit about why. They attributed it to transnational legislation, governance and public outreach, regulation, enforcement, and people being told about it. That is the finding I did not expect to be reporting on this channel. Every previous video in this series has been about a gap in the law being exploited. This one is about a law that worked. So let me show you the law because you are the beneficiary of it and you have almost certainly never used it. Now, before that, I want your help because I cannot photograph every fish counter in Britain and you can. Here is the task. Go to any supermarket fish section. The chilled cabinet is fine. You do not need a counter. Pick up any pack of white fish. Turn it over and read the small print on the back, the block that looks like technical noise. You are looking for 4 things: a scientific name in italics, usually 2 Latin words, a production method, a catch area, and a note about whether the fish has been previously frozen. Photograph it. Then put in the comments what you found, the shop, the fish, and crucially whether all 4 were actually there and legible. I read these properly, and material from every video in this series so far has ended up in my research notes. And answer me one more thing, because I think the answer will be near unanimous. Had you ever in your life read that block of small print on a pack of fish before today? I hadn't, not once. Say so. Right. The law. Fish sold in the United Kingdom must carry 6 pieces of information. 6. This is more mandatory detail than almost any other food in the shop. And here they are. 1. The commercial designation. The proper trade name of the species. 2. The scientific name. The Latin binomial, the actual genus and species. This may be provided on a nearby poster rather than the pack itself, but it must be available. 3. The production method. Caught at sea, caught in freshwater, or farmed. 4. The catch or production area. 5. The category of fishing gear used. And 6. Whether the product has been defrosted. Now think about what that list gives you compared with anything else we have examined in this series. On a packet of biscuits, you get a manufacturer's head office. On a chicken, you get 2 countries. On an apple, you get 1 country. On a loaf from the in-store bakery, you may get the name of the product and nothing else at all. On a piece of fish, you get the species in Latin, the ocean region, whether it was farmed or wild, and how it was caught. Let me take those apart because 2 of them are far more powerful than they look. The scientific name is the anti-marketing device. Commercial designations are lists of approved trade names, and DEFRA maintains the official list for this country, the commercial designations of fish. Those trade names are useful, but they are still names, and names can be stretched. A Latin binomial cannot. Gadus morhua is Atlantic cod and nothing else. There is no marketing department on Earth that can make Pangasius hypothalamus sound like cod once it is written in Latin on the back of the pack. So the single most valuable habit you can build at the fish counter is this. Ignore the front, find the italics, and if you do not recognize the Latin, look it up on your phone before you buy. It takes 11 seconds. It is the closest thing to a DNA test available to a member of the public. And then there is the catch area, which is the thing I promised you at the start. The world's oceans are divided into numbered fishing zones by the FAO, the same UN body that produced the 20% figure. It is a global grid. The Northeast Atlantic, which is the water around Britain, is Area 27. The Mediterranean and Black Sea are Area 37. The Western Central Pacific is Area 71. Within the major areas there are subdivisions, subareas and divisions that narrow it further, which is why you will sometimes see something like Northeast Atlantic FAO 27 with additional digits after it. That is what that string of numbers is. It is not a batch code and it is not a warehouse reference. It is a coordinate. It is the actual patch of sea. And once you know that, you can do something genuinely useful, which is check the story for internal consistency. If a pack tells you the species in Latin, the ocean area by number, and the gear type, those 3 things have to make sense together. A species that does not live in that area is a red flag. A gear type that is not used for that species in that region is a red flag. You are not verifying the fish, and you cannot do that without a laboratory, but you are verifying whether the paperwork is coherent. And incoherent paperwork is where nearly every documented case of this begins. There are exemptions, and you should know them. Fish worth less than about €20 sold directly to you by the person who caught it is exempt from the first 3 requirements, which is a sensible carve-out for a bloke selling mackerel off a boat, not a loophole for industry. And smoked fish is exempt from the commercial designation requirement. So if the law is this good and the retail numbers are this comparatively decent, where did the problem go? It went where the labels stop. In May 2024, researchers from Queen's University Belfast and University College Dublin, led by Professor Saskia van Ruth, published an assessment of food fraud vulnerability across British post-harvest seafood supply chains. They surveyed companies across the sector and scored them against 48 separate fraud factors. The overall picture was medium vulnerability, not catastrophic, not clean. But the detail is where it lives. Food service companies, restaurants, takeaways, catering, canteens had the least comprehensive control measures of anyone in the chain. And they accounted for 42% of historic fraud reports. Read those 2 findings together. The part of the industry responsible for the largest share of recorded fraud is also the part with the weakest defenses against it. And it makes total sense when you think about the labeling. Everything I just taught you, the Latin name, the FAO area, the gear type, is printed on a pack. When fish is served to you cooked on a plate, in batter or in a sauce, there is no pack. The words on the menu are the entire information environment, and a menu is not a label. The FAO report found the same thing internationally, and its figure for European schools and hospitals is the one that stopped me, mislabelling rates in those settings reaching 50%. 50%. In canteens serving children and patients, the 2 groups least able to question what is on the tray. The British study also found some things about the companies themselves that are worth hearing plainly. 34% had no fraud detection methods at all. Only 47% had an independent whistleblowing system. 65% conducted no integrity screening of employees. 63% reported that guidance on preventing fraud was inadequate. And one clear positive: certified companies, those operating under recognized assurance schemes, showed significantly stronger controls across more than 80% of the control-related factors measured. Certification on this evidence actually does something. The study also ranked products by vulnerability, and the ranking is not what most people would guess. Cod was relatively low risk. Salmon, higher, weaker supplier monitoring, and a history of misrepresentation on weight and origin. And the highest risk product in British seafood was prawns. 2 reasons. The first is supply geography. Significant volumes come from countries with high corruption indices, including Vietnam, China, and India, where verification is structurally harder. The second is a technique that has nothing to do with species at all. Prawns can be bulked with water using water-binding agents. You are not being sold a different animal. You are being sold the correct animal plus water you paid prawn prices for, held in place by additives so that it does not simply run out of the bag. Which brings me to the number I promised you at the start. Scampi. In British law and British usage, scampi means one thing: the tail meat of the langoustine, Nephrops norvegicus, also called the Norway lobster or Dublin Bay prawn. It is a real animal. It is a genuinely valuable one, and Scotland is the world's leading exporter of it. Scottish vessels landed over 22,000 tonnes, worth around £70 million in 2021. Now look at what scampi is once it reaches a plate. It is a small beige lump inside a thick breadcrumb shell. It has no shape you could identify, no texture you could challenge, and no visible characteristic of any kind. It is the most information-poor food product in the British diet. And according to a briefing by the marine conservation group Open Seas, in lower quality products, langoustine is routinely mixed with whitefish and water to reduce cost. Their assessment states that wholetail scampi products have been found to contain up to 30% of the meat of other fish species. 30%. Not a trace. Not a contamination. Up to nearly a third of the contents by their finding being something other than the animal the product is named after, with water added inside the coating on top of that. I want to be careful with this. That is a campaign group's briefing, and it describes findings across products, not a claim about any one brand, and the sector disputes elements of how this has been characterized. But the underlying vulnerability is not in dispute by anyone because it is structural. When a product is minced, bound, breaded, and fried, there is no consumer check available at any point. None. You are relying entirely on the document. The same briefing notes something else worth knowing while we are here. Around 94% of Scottish langoustine landings come from bottom trawling, and bottom trawlers discard an estimated 44% of what they catch. Nearly half. Caught, sorted, and returned to the sea dead or dying because it was not the thing being fished for. That is not a labelling issue, and it is not fraud. It is just what is happening underneath the breadcrumbs, and it does not appear on any packet either. Now, one last thing, and it closes a door I opened 3 videos ago. In the video on fake farms, I read out a list of invented brand names. 7 farms that do not exist, launched by one supermarket in a single month in 2016. And there was an 8th in the same family which I mentioned once and then left alone. It was not a farm, it was a fishmonger, an invented harbour to sit alongside the invented countryside. I said at the time that I had not stopped thinking about it. Here is why. Over the last few years, British supermarkets have been closing their fresh fish counters. Tesco and Sainsbury's cut theirs. Morrison's closed 35 fish counters and 35 meat counters in a single restructuring, alongside cafes, florists, and pharmacies. And then something interesting happened. The backlash was significant enough that Morrison's reversed course, and from mid-2026 began reopening Market Street counters in selected stores, with a spokesperson describing them as part of the company's DNA and a real differentiator. So put the 2 facts side by side. The actual fishmonger, a trained person standing behind actual fish who could tell you what species you were looking at and answer a question about it, was removed from hundreds of stores as an unprofitable overhead. And an invented fishmonger, a name on a packet with a harbour-sounding word in it, was created and put on the shelf where the real one used to be. That is the whole of modern food retail in one image. The expertise was expensive, so it was removed. The impression of expertise was cheap, so it was manufactured. And when customers noticed the difference and complained loudly enough, some of the real ones came back, which tells you the demand was there the entire time. So here is the method. 6 steps, and this is the most powerful checklist in the series so far, because on fish the law is genuinely on your side. 1. Find the italics. The scientific name is the single most reliable thing on the pack. If you do not recognize it, look it up before you buy. 2. Read the catch area. Learn one number if you learn nothing else. Area 27 is the Northeast Atlantic, the water around Britain. Then check whether the species you are holding actually lives there. 3. Check whether it says farmed or wild caught, and treat any front-of-pack imagery of boats and nets as irrelevant until you have. 4. Look for the defrosted declaration. Fish sold from a chilled cabinet that has been previously frozen must say so, and fresh in a shop that sells thawed fish is not the same word you think it is. 5. Be most skeptical exactly where the information stops. Battered, breaded, minced, coated in a sauce, or served to you on a plate in a restaurant. These are the conditions under which nearly all documented substitution occurs, because they are the conditions under which checking becomes impossible. 6. Buy whole fish when you can. A whole fish has a head, eyes, gills, fins, and skin, a complete set of identifying features that cannot be faked, cannot be substituted, and require no laboratory. Everything in this video exists because those features were removed. Buying them back is the only total defense there is. And that leaves one final thread, which has been sitting in my notes for weeks and which I now cannot leave alone. Everything today came down to a food whose identity you cannot verify by looking. Fish is the extreme case, but it is not the only one. There is a product in your kitchen right now in a jar that has one ingredient. 1. It is sold as the most natural thing in the entire shop. It is what people buy specifically when they want to avoid processing, avoid additives, avoid refined sugar. It comes with pictures of hives and meadows, and it costs a considerable premium precisely because of what it is supposed to be. And in 2023, the European Commission ran a coordinated investigation into it, with laboratory testing across 16 member states, plus Norway and Switzerland, backed by the EU's anti-fraud office. Of the imported samples tested, 46% were found to be suspicious, suspected of not complying with the rules through the use of added sugar syrups, colorings, and the masking of true geographical origin. The Anti-Fraud Office investigated 44 operators and sanctioned 7 of them. 46% of a product with one ingredient. That is the next page of the ledger. Honey, the syrup problem, how you detect it, why the country on the jar is frequently the least reliable word on it, and what happened when they looked specifically at what was arriving in and passing through this country. Before then, go and photograph the small print on a pack of fish. All 4 ITMs, bring it to the comments. And the next time you are standing in front of a fillet, remember that it has no face. Everything you know about it, you know because somebody wrote it down. The good news for once is that in this country, they have to write down rather a lot. The food ledger is open,